Today, I want to tell a story. It's a bit of a detective story, but it's very much a personal story, and it concerns blind white fish. 27 years ago, when I was a student, I and a group of friends were wishing to visit Persia. We wanted to see the place, and in particular, we wanted to see its kanats, Persia's extraordinary underground water system. But then we read that blind white fish lived in these kanats, and that made our project doubly interesting. Never before had any such cave fish been found in Asia, and naturally, we wanted to be the first people to do so. Well, in that year of 1950, the four of us left England in a second-hand army truck. Our destination was Kirman in southeastern Persia, an area rich in kanats. Eventually, after a lot of driving, we reached those hills over there by the road from the north, found Kirman lying at the foot, spent some time there, came across this broad Kirman plain, and eventually reached this village of Jupa, green and beautiful. The reason we chose this village was because it had a very convenient and excellent kanat, which lies underneath all these curious molehills lying here. So, to tell this story and of our abysmal failure and of our eventual success, let's begin in the hurly-burly of Tehran, Iran's capital. It was strange being back again after all those years. It was a kind of reincarnation, for I felt the same, but everything else had changed immeasurably. The traffic, the streets, the kind of noise. There are 4 times as many people in Tehran now as then, and I didn't even recognize many of the new buildings that passed us by. What extraordinary things they had done to the place since I had turned my back on it in those student days. But certain things hadn't changed, such as the dramatic shift of scene when you leave that capital. As before, I now headed south, traveling the 600 miles between Tehran and Kirman. This old highway to India is vastly different today, smooth and straight, and I well remembered the old corrugated track along which we had battered south. Today's Iran is busy, prosperous, independent, and hastening to build itself into a rich and modern state before the oil runs dry. But I was happy that not everything had changed. There was a clanking and we stopped, and I remembered all the clankings and stoppings of those years before, when a bunch of student mechanics had filmed themselves allegedly fixing the first vehicle ever to come their way. However, Hassan, my chauffeur on the return visit, actually knew a thing or two about machinery and speedily had us on our way south again, notwithstanding my repeated and fairly incomprehensible requests to stop and look at things en route. Kobe? Kobe, Hassan? Okay, Anjar. همین جا خوابه. اوکی. خیلی ممنون. ببند سویچو. خیلی ممنون حسن. On that first journey to Persia, naturally enough, as soon as we saw a convenient line of kanats, we came to have a look at them, to see what we were up against. Sure enough, there is water down there flowing through the desert. The thought of going down there and doing work made us all feel, well, apprehensive at the very least. I don't think any of us like dark holes in the ground, particularly small dark holes half full of water. But having driven 4,000 miles to look for blind white fish, we couldn't just turn around because we didn't like the look of the place they might be living in. So, at first, we went to talk to the people who work with the kanats. Down below was a man cleaning the stream and filling bags. Up above, his colleagues emptied them and then sent them down again. On my first visit, I had never had the courage to go down this way. It was time to put that right. Do they think that rope's strong enough for me? They sure? What about this windlass? If I go down, will they promise to bring me up again somehow? Okay, well, if you'll explain to them, yeah, that I'll have a go in a minute after this bag full. They can let down a different bag full. Yeah. Careful with the meat hook. Right. Let's get myself organised. Uh-huh, right. Ah. Secure? Okay. Mm-hmm. Now what?
Put your feet down first and
Put my feet where?
Put down, little, open
Right.
up, yeah.
Excuse me, I'll just adjust my dress.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Over.
Over?
Over.
Well,
خیلی آهسته.
right.
خیلی آهسته. Watchman.
Okay.
Over.
Done.
Anthony. Go on.
A bit dark, yeah?
Fortunately, the sound of that creaking windlass diminished as I descended into this kanat. For years, I'd had nightmares about such things. But despite whatever it was they were telling me to do and being cut in two by that rope, the experience was intriguing and I knew I would never have that nightmare again. It wasn't deep, 50 feet or so, and I stood at the bottom with a calm respect for this remarkable form of primitive engineering. It is primitive. The Persians had kanats long before the time of Christ. The ancient historian Polybius writes of filling in the wells of a town before attacking it, plainly kanat wells, and not the ordinary kind. In fact, many of the Persian towns, such as Kirman, owe their existence to kanats and the water they supply. It's an amazing technique, simple, effective, and needs to be explained.
Well, this is how a kanat is made. First of all, you've got the mountains, such as these mountains. Up here, they're the mountains that catch all the water. So it's running down the side, and where you expect to find water reasonably shallow is somewhere down here if the land slopes away like that. So what the kanat workers do is to come along and dig a well down there. And if that gets sufficient water in the bottom, then they're encouraged, then they can go ahead with the kanat. So they estimate, by going along the surface with a piece of string and a blob of water on it, it's a very nice system, where the kanat will come onto the surface. So from a little lower down, in order that you've got a slight incline, you start digging. You start digging in there, and every now and then you make another little well to the surface in order to get rid of the stuff that you've dug out, the excavated material. You dig again, more, so the wells happen like this. This is being in a straight line, and you make it a straight line just by looking behind you and seeing where the two candles are lined up nicely. You go along, this may take years to make because it's a very long distance, and eventually you dig through into the mother well. The water which has been flowing in there then starts flowing down. It comes down here, and then you're able to make your village, life can begin. Build your mosque, well, kind of mosque. Now, the thing that impresses me about all this very much is not just that you're digging through here in an unsupported way, but the distances may be so big. Here in this particular kanat, it's only 3 miles from there to there. That's a very long way when you're burrowing. But it may be 20 miles, it may be as much as 50 miles from there to there. 50 miles of unsupported channel. And as for this mother well, here they're about 150 feet deep, but in some places they go up to 1,000 feet deep. 1,000 feet, unsupported well going down like that. But all that labor enables you to get a stream in the desert, and that's what it's all about.
To a man in a desert, such a sight is a kind of miracle. To us, as students, the creation of such a stream from an underground source meant that it might have tapped the ancestral home of some blind cave fish.
This is a hole into the side of the kanat where the village people come and collect their drinking water, because it's best up at this end. And this is where I used to go in all those years ago to explore the kanats. Well, just before I went in for the first time, someone said, "Oh, by the way, these things are called the murderers." So I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because they kill so many of the workers in them." So, with that message ringing in my ears, I went in for the first time. So let's go and see what kills so many people. Follow me.
Normally, only kanat workers go along these channels. Right-minded people keep out of them, for they are dark and cold and have killed. But, blind fish or not, I found them fascinating.
I suppose the first thing that strikes the visitor to a kanat is there's absolutely nothing holding the roof up. Quite unsupported. Very unsupported. It's also very strange to be down among the roots. Here, big ones coming down seeking for water. As soon as they reach this comforting water level, then they branch out and make use of it. Proves, of course, that we haven't gone very far yet. We can't be more than, say, 15, 20 feet below the surface. Kanats should be straight, and so whenever there's a curvy bit, it means there has been some kind of roof collapse, like here. After that, they fill it up with stones so the water can't get through anymore, can't erode away, make the detour. So, back onto the straight section once again. Kanats come in all sizes. There's the broad bits. Oh, there's the narrow bits, which are high. Because every so often, at the bottom of a well, find a nest. Safe enough place. But it must be very difficult for the parent birds to come flying almost vertically, 30 feet or so down the well shaft. But heaven knows what the fledglings do when they hatch out and have to take their first flight 30 feet vertically up.
think at this time one should spare a thought for the makani, the men who make these kanats. Very dangerous job. Sometimes it's fairly easy in that they're going through soft enough stuff. But other times, for instance, just round the corner here, it's not so much earth or rock. You can see where they're picks. Metal these days, where they used to be just antlers, have hacked away at the rock in order to make the right shape. They always make little holes for their lights. They put these lamps in, just ordinary paraffin lamps, but the advantage is they sort of go on working even if you drop them in the water. They have the little hole. It doesn't give off much light, and in fact many of them, makani, the workers, are blind because they can get on almost as well down here as a man with good eyes. Well, up near the top end of this particular kanat begins to divide. Here's one channel, here's another channel. The reason it does this and comes at ends like a hand is because then it's got more channels that can enter the water-bearing strata where the water starts seeping in. So, as this one looks a bit bigger, I'll go up this way. I think I'm beginning to get the feeling that I've gone far enough. It's getting a bit cold, but longing for sunlight. The channel's getting rather smaller. So, this is Persia's extraordinary contribution to getting water onto the surface. Here I am, about 2.5 miles from the entrance. Don't know quite. There's about 100 feet of rock up there, rock and erosion debris that's fallen down from the mountain. Water going past me at about 3/4 of a mile an hour. A stream, not a well that you've got to lift the stuff up to the top, but a stream that's going to flow on the surface. Up there, not very much further, is where it taps the water-bearing area. It comes in through the side, just as in a normal well, and then flows down along this nearly horizontal passage. Well, as I said, it's none too warm in here, and I think I'll find a way out. There were many fish in this kanat, but not the cave kind I was looking for. They lived in the area where the waters divided according to ownership, with each stream going off to irrigate and supply distinct portions of the village. The kanat is much like a blood system, branching here and there, giving life and sustenance, flowing through every part dependent upon it. It's used for drinking, for irrigation, for washing. Without it there'd be nothing, no communal bundles of sparrows' nests, no sparrows probably in that area, for there'd be no water, certainly no trees, no agriculture, and no settled people. In the village of Jupa they call their kanat Goharis, the flowing jewel, and nowhere is far from its sparkle and its life. It's an excellent arrangement, but I wanted to know its details. Could you explain to me about the water, how he pays for it and how much he uses?
این موضوع آب اون دفعه پرسیدم ازتون چجوریه چند میدن براش چند خریدنش
این میدونی چطوره الان این تاک من میشم تاکدار امروز.
It seems that no one cares about drinking water, and you can take all you want for irrigation 3 times a year. And after you've paid for a quota of years, you never have to pay again. The flowing jewels are there for you, your crops, your livelihood. As Goharis was first excavated several hundred years ago, no one knows when. It's only necessary to collect enough money to keep it in good order. Besides, with a rich cash crop like opium, here grown under government control, there's plenty of money to spare to keep the water flowing, the fountainhead of all this lush prosperity.
This is the very bottom end of town. The kanat of the flowing jewels is certainly no jewel anymore, not flowing, more like a puddle, in fact. It's given life to the village, and in doing so has died itself. So, when it finishes, the village finishes. And then what you're left with at the end is just rock, wilderness. In fact, what you started with before the kanat gave life to the place.
Most of Persia does not have water. Most of it is wilderness. For the traveller of the old days, it was a matter of days or weeks moving over the brown land between each patch of green, with the remorseless sun burning the land browner still and making the wretched traveller despair that he'll ever see green trees again. He looks through wrinkled eyes over the tired land, sees mirages, shapes moving along the ground, and heat, and absolutely nothing resembling a flowing jewel. For me, it's very important when I wish to understand a place that I immerse myself in it, and therefore walk for miles over the land. For then I begin to appreciate a little of the ecstasy when a slither of green slowly comes my way. I realize why there's so much renown for the Persian garden. It's not particularly fantastic as a garden, but anything cool and green is better than a wilderness. The trees get nearer, and the mosque, and the promise of shade, and the absolute certainty of running water. On one side of this wall is wilderness, but a kanat has surfaced, and on the wall's other side is everything that a wilderness is not. There are pools, reflections, flowers. There is peace. A European is not dumbfounded by the sight and sound of water. A desert dweller is, and knows how best to use it. The creators of fine gardens only really bothered about two criteria. Make certain there is shade, plenty of it, but make doubly sure of water.
So the first thing is to get out of that wilderness and into the shade, out of the sun. Listen to the sound of running water. Use some of that water on your outer man, and then worry about the inner man a bit. When Omar Khayyam spoke of singing in the wilderness, underneath a bough, with a book, loaf of bread, wine, and thou, he wasn't in the wilderness, he was assuredly in a Persian garden. But I feel what made everything here taste so much better, the bread better, the book better, and the thou better, was because right out there, just beyond the wall, there is wilderness. Here, there is everything. And out there, there is nothing.
Of course, these days, because we've grown weary of our cities, we tend to say that a wilderness has everything. We revel in its nothingness and take extra delight in its blobs of colour, whether this cow parsley of a flower or this with its spiky specks of red. We're right in our way in that there's nourishment for the spirit almost everywhere, but there's precious little to eat above the level of locusts and wild honey for hungry hermits. In Persia, between the blobs of green, there is wilderness, whether you like it or not. Good perhaps for the occasional hawk moth caterpillar chumping its way through a lonely plant. Practically every other kind of creature. If you happen to be a dung beetle, there's a long way between one bit of dung and the next. There are lizards, and making every journey seem a long way, there are also tortoises. But between one oddity and the next, there's always lots of nothing, and certainly no fish. Suddenly I saw what the Persians call a goat sucker. It entered a hole. I dug and then, protected with a duffel bag, tried to get it out. A most splendid beast. A monitor lizard, all of 3 feet long. It never does suck goats for their milk, but can bite, hence the bag. I figured it might go back to its hole if I let it go to see it run. But I forgot to figure that it might come out again and run some more.
One of the extraordinary things about this part of the country is that you have enormous great hunks of mountain with nothing in the way of a river coming out of them. This great piece of land behind me, I would have thought, would produce a river with the dimensions, say, of the Danube. But all it can produce is something about the size of a Scottish burn. In fact, that is the biggest permanent river for scores of miles on every side of here. Well, the Persians, actually finding a permanent river, then do their best to turn it into a kind of surface kanat. They don't let it meander like a river. They control it, put banks on either side, and as soon as it's possible to use it for irrigation, to use it for a village, then they do so. In my search for blind white fish, hearing that there was a real river in the area, I naturally came along to look at it. Well, I had a very nice day on the surface in the sunshine and not down in some kanat, and I spent all day looking, but I found no fish of any kind, and certainly none that were blind or white.
But failure to find any cave fish, as I said at the beginning, eventually became success. Life is odd if you give it half a chance. My chance and my good fortune came in the Zagros mountains, at a spot about 400 miles away and a quarter of a century later from the place and the time where I'd first been looking for blind white fish. And that explains why it was that I and two caving friends were in the Zagros a short while later, together with a ludicrous pile of equipment, to follow up the lead that chance had put into my hands. The two friends and the equipment were crucial to the next part of the story. So too the railway line, along which we sped in a kind of private bus while we watched the splendid scenery rattle by. Only in the 1930s was this line built that links Tehran with the sea and the Persian Gulf. And it was in those 1930s that two Danes, naturalists as well as railway workers, took time off one day to have a look at some fish. We, 39 years later, were following in their tracks and trusting that our trained bus driver knew that nothing was coming from the other way.
Continue looking forward. I think probably you can see mountains up there.
The point of the mini-train was to dump our equipment and ourselves at the very foot of the valley where the Danes had found their fish. What they had discovered was Asia's first true cave fish, blind and colourless. But they didn't publish the fact until after the war and after that student search of mine. Hence the interest in the valley where they had found the fish, and hence our tracing of their tracks. It was a beautiful valley, good grazing for sheep and goats, without a road of any kind, and absolutely right, in my opinion, for the curious home of a very curious kind of fish. The sheep and goats were on their way higher up into the hills when we arrived, being driven along the path mainly by their own momentum, but also by the most lethargic kind of sheepdog that I've ever seen. But who would wish to hasten in such a glorious place? I had come up this valley the year before. I'd been in Persia and had of course wanted to see just where the Danes had succeeded. Oddly, it had been difficult discovering just which valley had been the right one. The published information had not been clear. But now I was able to move up this valley with confidence and to lead Richard Stevenson and Martin Farr, with all their experience as cavers and divers, to the home of the blind white fish.
There is a tree, I know it, further on.
There aren't too many people who like caving. There are far fewer who like diving in caves, hoping to discover new caverns when they surface. But Richard and Martin were two of this very special breed, and I had a cave to show them.
Well, this was the very spot where, thankfully, I knew I was in the right valley. Until that moment, there'd been doubt, because in this original paper, the sketch map, to put it frankly, is not good. It's got the railway line crossing that big river back there in the wrong place, and the names that seem to be used by any of the local people. But suddenly here, it was very nice, because the picture, this photostat, started coming into life. There's two great peaks at either end, started looking exactly right. And that was very comforting, so needless to say, I took a picture of it myself.
The instructions from the Danes were rather like those of a buried treasure map. They're fine, once you know you're on the right island. Walk on through 500 yards of myrtle, they said, then through a small village, then up a little stream, past a 30-foot waterfall, and very soon you meet the pool. This is the home of Asia's first to be found cave fish, a species now known as Uranocypris typhlops. A very important place, a very important fish. And on my visit the previous year, I'd scooped up 2 of them. They were plainly without eyes, without pigment, and moved somewhat slowly. But my 2 captures lived, and I was able to get them back alive to the British Museum of Natural History in London. There I took them to Dr. Humphrey Greenwood, head of the fish section, who confirmed that one was Uranocypris, but the other was a brand new species. Naturally enough, I was overjoyed to have discovered a blind cave fish. In fact, it was the first ever blind loach in the world. On the left is my fish. On the right, Uranocypris, the kind the Danes had found. Now, if you're going to discover a fish, it might as well be interesting, and how's this for odd behavior? It was blind, pink in colour, very strange in its behavior, and what more could you ask for? I had to admit that Uranocypris was also odd, swimming on its side or even upside down at times. But the cave loach was, in my prejudiced view, even more extraordinary. Having no effective swim bladder, like the loaches, it was forever sinking when it ceased swimming. On the loach's snout were 3 pairs of barbels, but its lack of pigment meant that you could see everything. The colour of its blood, the 2 chambers of a pumping heart, gills, a gut black with ingested food leading down the body towards the anus. It was an X-ray of a scene, all completely visible. They were a remarkable pair of fishes. No wonder we wanted some more.
Ah, there's, I see.
Yes.
Yep. Right. Okay. Because if they were proper fish, so I wouldn't be able to catch them as easy as this.
Martin, Richard and I netted as many as we could see in that pool. They were easy to catch, once we'd caught sight of them in that murky water, for they were slow movers and, being blind, couldn't see the
Yeah,
net.
very red-blooded. It's amazing, they've got so much more red blood around their gills, which I agree is only reasonable, but it's just amazing to be able to see it like this. They're so fat. I'm beginning to wonder whether this, with all its beetles and dead leaves and things, is in fact the beginning of the food chain.
It's always a problem to know where cave fish get their food from. Nothing much is generally washed down through the cave, and some say that bats and bat droppings are the principal source of the food supply in the average cave. But these fish did look well fed, and there was a lot of other life in that pool. We collected some of it: pond skaters, water boatmen, insect larvae, and it did seem as if there was a lot to eat. There was even a freshwater crab, far bigger than the fish, and it too indicated that the pool was rich in nourishment. Anyway, along with all the insects and the crab, we collected 11 of the blind fish. Given luck and their ability to survive heat, train journeys and plane journeys, we'd get this further assortment to the British Museum.
The zoologists say that you wouldn't get a couple of species of fish living just in a pool. There's got to be some huge reservoir in there. I think the only thing is for you to go down and see.
Yeah, we'll enjoy that.
Right, Martin?
Yes, I think so.
In short, dive in there and have a look. All that evening, Richard and Martin compressed air into the cylinders they'd need for the dive, and generally checked over their equipment. So what about tomorrow? What do you think our chances are?
There should be something nice and big underwater, I would feel.
How big?
Yeah, Should be some nice big passages. That water's been coming out of there for a long time. It's a nice big opening. It looks nice, clear and inviting underwater.
Yeah.
Should be something.
But I still wasn't prepared for the sight I saw in the morning.
I'll be glad to get in the water.
Right, now how much air time in both your bottles?
Well, there's a maximum duration of 45 minutes in each one.
So that's hour and a half?
Well, you could say that, but normally we just use one bottle completely in reserve. It's not touched at all. That's our safety margin.
Yeah. But if you disappear and don't come back after an hour and a half,
We'll be back within an hour and a half to let you know what we found.
you better be, because it would spoil my day.
Yeah, it would spoil our day too. All right, just check the reserve. Okay. Oh, keep a little distance behind there. Yeah, I'll give you a couple of minutes. Yeah, all right. Yeah. Okay, cheerio.
Cheerio then. You can hear me. What are you going to do? Stay 2 minutes behind him, did I hear?
Well, I just give him a chance to get up front.
Yeah.
There's always a chance that his fins might knock your mask off. Or...
Sure. So will he... I see the bubbles are going up right to the far end there.
Yes. Well, you always try and follow a wall.
Yeah.
Because a wall is the only sort of continuity you've got, especially if the visibility goes.
Yes.
As you can see, already the visibility is far less than it was.
But there's still bubbles, that means he still hasn't found any kind of way in. When
Yes,
they...
or it's a descending passage and they're rolling up the roof.
Aha. That's they're getting less.
I would say that he's definitely into some sort of passage.
So is that the time for you to go now?
Yes, I'll go in a minute. That's just about a minute.
Okay. So the bubbles are definitely stopped.
Well, bye.
Bye. See you soon, please.
No one had dived before in this all-important pool. Up at the top, there was nothing to do except hold on to their Ariadne lifeline and wait for the bubbles to reappear.
Hey, Richard.
Tightens up.
Get small.
It's a tight rift. Martin's just coming up now, I think.
Uh-huh. But it just gets too small to go through, is that it?
Seems to. I was jammed above him, and you couldn't even see your pressure gauge holding it in front of the light.
Because of the
Yeah,
magicness
total.
of the water. Well, when he comes up, then we'll have a council of war. Uh-huh.
You got the reel? That didn't take long closing up, did it?
Hey,
Extremely deep.
extremely deep
How deep
vertically.
were we? Goes in straight down the dip.
Uh-huh.
Must have gone down about 60 feet.
You went down 60 feet just now. And what did you see? Or
You
not
can't see anything when you're going down feet first. It's very narrow. You can just wedge yourself against the walls and work your way down.
Were you
Well,
going
it's
down
opening
feet
up.
first?
Pardon?
Were you going down feet first?
Feet first. It's too tight to go down head first.
Uh-huh.
You'd never be able to turn around and come back up. But I thought the clear water to start with was coming from the right, which then went down very deep. I would expect as well the one on the left goes down deep as well.
So there are two, are there?
But
There are two, they divide.
it's all the same passage.
Yeah.
It's the same narrow fissure, but it's separated by a... well, it's
Bit of
completely
rock in the
separate,
middle.
but at the top
Yeah.
it splits.
Oh, I see. So
I think it joins up again underwater. But it's very narrow, just wide enough to slide down.
The upshot was, after that first and other dives, that no way could be found into the home of the blind white fish. It was all too constricted, and that, alas, was that. So, back again to London, Cromwell Road, and the British Museum of Natural History. Morning. Can you call Dr. Greenwood, please, of Fish section, and tell him Anthony Smith is here?
Certainly, sir, with pleasure.
And can you tell him I brought some more fishes for him? Thank you. Down in the cave-like labyrinth of the museum's basement, I went past rows and rows of other collections from other times, with that precious pot of 11 still living blind white fish. And once again, in that labyrinth, I discovered Humphrey Greenwood.
Humphrey.
Ah, hello. You got through. Good.
More fish.
Let's have a look. Now, this time, no...
Unfortunately, as I knew by this time only too well, I had caught just the Irano-Cypris, the Danish kind, and not any of the loaches, the brand new species that I had found just 1 year before. So it was only Irano-Cypris, and none of the Nemachilus. You can tell me whether they are all Irano-Cypris.
Yeah. No doubt about it. There isn't a Nemachilus there, so you were quite right this time.
A double check, and they were all Irano-Cypris. However, Humphrey Greenwood poured balm onto my disappointment by explaining how useful these would be.
You're bound with 11 of them to have both sexes, so with luck we might get them to breed. And being perhaps a little morbid from your point of view, I've got material here anyhow to really do some comparative anatomy and osteology, which I want to do, as you know.
You mean to kill them?
Not quite in those terms. We'll allow them to die.
It's been said that most of biology, the study of life, is in fact the study of creatures or bits of creatures that are dead. And it was into this mortuary, this permanent hall of fish fame, that Humphrey took my Nemachilus of the year before. It was now dead, pickled for posterity. Nemachilus smithii, holotype, the first of its kind to be described, found in the Zagros mountains, and now all on its own at the bottom of a pot just off the Cromwell Road. Reverentially, we placed it among other famous fish, having found it by a cave in Persia, only to bury it in this other kind of cave. So what of the cave itself? My bet is that no one will ever get into the real cave home of my blind white fish.